Okay, so platform lock-in. Another barrier of entry, which goes back to the opening of the chapter, and the iPod Touch, and now the iPad, is technology, right? Technology is barrier of entry. Technology is barrier of entry. You know, like for example, again, if we talk about even a retailer, like if you have an app, right, for your store, or if you're a streaming site, if you don't have access to, for example, a platform like iTunes or iOS for that matter, and we know that Apple has these kind of arbitrary rules. Steam is another one that comes under fire for video games quite a bit, right? Too. That you know, it just puts you at a disadvantage when so many people are using those devices, right, for access to goods. On the other hand, right, like if you know, say for example, you want to watch or buy the things that other people are. If you don't have an iPod, right, or an iPhone, right, you're kind of out of luck, you know. I mean, and we know for a fact that it's like, you know, we know that there's planned obsolescence, which means that like my iPhone 4 works perfectly fine. It turns on, it does everything it needs, but is it feasible to actually watch content on it, play video games? Like, no. So, but what if I can't afford to get, you know, an iPhone 10? And then, you know, some people might say, well, that's, you know, tough luck, you have to deal with it. It's like, yeah, but, you know, again, like this, right, even before, you know, the break, we've already talked about how, like, it's very clear in this day and age, right, that the internet is no longer a luxury, but that internet access, like cheap, fast internet access, is actually, you know, a necessity, and you know, arguably even a kind of a basic right, right? So yeah, it's like, you know, like one would want to, I guess on some level, watch those shows and whatnot. This is again to relatedly, right? So platform lock-in and this idea of like, you know, kind of related to Tuesday, but stuff being tied to specific devices and platforms. This is, we're seeing again the relationship between hardware and software, right? How those two are kind of tied to each other, joined at the hip. Now, because of this, on 130, so a line, and we are kind of heading in the home stretch. At the beginning of 130, courts and legal scholars, well, let's kind of back up. Beyond the search and switching costs described above, the technology itself can create a lock-in between digital content and digital platforms, resulting in a new barrier to entry. Meaning like, oh, if you want this, it's a PS4 exclusive, for example. Digital rights management encoding often limits purchased content to a particular distributor's ecosystem. So if you get something through iTunes, you're not going to be able to play it on an Android, right? Courts and legal scholars have argued that this raises significant antitrust concerns. Who? Courts. Legal scholars. Not media scholars, but legal scholars are raising questions about platform lock-in in regard to antitrust concerns. Why should we care about this, right? Or I guess what I'm claiming is that a lot of people would be like, so what? You know, what's the big deal about Apple having DRM on their products and you can't, you know, carry them over, or that there's no cross-platform, that I can't, you know, I like me personally, I bought 3 copies of Overwatch at this point. Like, why is that such a big deal? It's like, you know, it's totally natural. Well, the courts, right? The American court system and legal scholars apparently think this is a concern, and it's a concern in terms of antitrust, right? And along these lines, you know, why are antitrust a concern? Why should we be concerned with antitrust? You know, that I won't kind of go into this. This is a question that I'll ask you, and I want you to really be thinking about, like, what are we talking about this entire time? And again, yeah, I mean, I think you kind of know where I'm going from. So, let's just go ahead and power through like the rest. The next section is information bundling, and this idea of bundles and economies of scale. This is deeply tied into like these sort of shifting notions of value, right? So it's like this idea that now online, you know, it's like who wants to, like the idea of like owning one song is kind of silly for us now, because our senses of like the worth of a song and how songs can be bundled with hundreds, if not thousands of other songs, like, you know, the thinking has quite changed. And so, for example, like Netflix, in their subscription service, they are kind of offering a bundle of all of that media. And ironically, right, even though we look at cable and we think that, you know, I don't watch 80% of these channels, I only want to pay for what we watch, we don't think of Netflix in the same way. It's like I don't look at 80% of Netflix, and yet somehow I think that it's still, I'm paying for the entire thing is worth it, right? It's a kind of interesting shift. But it's in that bundle, right? So, kind of like the, thinking like Santa's sack, right? That this is Netflix, right? Or Amazon for that matter, or iTunes, right? And you're getting all of these films. That's the promise. All of this content, right? You're getting it for the cheap cost of, you know, $7.99, or it's like $12.99 at this point, right? But, you know, the thing is, it's like a potato chip bag, right? It's like we don't actually see how much content there is, right? We don't know. It's all hidden behind the sort of the kind of interface. And in fact, the funny thing about Netflix is like we don't even know how big the actual bundle is to begin with, right? And they don't ever really have to tell us. They can just say thousands of titles, you know, they don't have to give us an exact number. And because we only see a part of it, we're the ones that, you know, and they're constantly switching things out, right? We know this for a fact. And yet we still think that we're getting bang for our buck, right? And again, like what's important is that it's digitization that allows for this. And relatedly, they also point out how this, what it does, is that it flattens individual specificity, right? Meaning that, like, when we're talking in terms of bundles, right, your individual tastes kind of don't matter because it's the same bundle towards everyone, right? But certain parts of the bundle are being tailored. And we all know too, right? We've already kind of gone through this to a pretty high degree about how, as individual as you are, you're really only individual in terms of how you relate to the other people in your kind of demographic. Hang on. Okay, so we got a few minutes. I don't think we'll be able to finish, but on 130, I'll talk about the block quote. This is the last full paragraph in information bundling, and then we're gonna have to change tapes out. Bundling multiple products allows a seller to do this very efficiently. The more products the seller has in a bundle, say the 10,000 or so shows on Netflix, the better the seller can predict the average value of the bundle across consumers. Not everyone assigns the same values to the same movies, but in a large bundle, the differences in the individual values average it out. And if a seller can accurately predict the average value its consumers are willing to pay for a bundle of products, just an average, right? All that is left is to set a price just slightly below that value, extracting all the value from the consumers. We'll continue in a Okay, so different people are going to have different price points for Netflix, how much it's worth to them, right? But if Netflix can accurately predict the average of all of those values of what the consumers are willing to pay, all they have to do is set the price just below that, right? And it will all kind of average out, right? Okay. Moving on, finally, platform development. Oh, another barrier of entry, this is 131. The main one is the initial, this is the first full paragraph, initial investment in reliable and efficient systems. Startup capital. right? How much money do you have when you start out, you know, the system? Netflix works relatively well, right? You know, I guess the thing that like pops in my mind is like the WWE network, right, for pro wrestling. That was a platform that was like, you know, riddled with bugs that did terribly. So do you have the money, even though, you know, WWE has the money, do they have the time and money to put into the platform on the front end to make it sure that they're reliable and efficient to begin with? And I mean, on another end, so it's like another kind of, I guess, like line that we'll use today in relation to, in addition to the game being rigged, right? It's that those who can afford to play, right? Like, do you have the money? It's like, for example, if you want to set up a web store, because you have something to offer, like, I don't know, you have like, you make like, you know how to make like board markers that have far more yield than the like average ones on the market. You know, are you able to set up a store to get that, to move that product in great quantity, or are you just going to have to go through the infrastructure that's already set up of Amazon, you know, something like Amazon, but also submit yourself to their conditions, and also, you know, they get a chunk of your revenue, etc. Right? Finally, they point out similarly that like HBO's initial sort of foray into streaming was riddled with problems, and finally, you know, they had the deep pockets that instead of trying to develop it in-house, they went over and outsourced, right? And who did they outsource to? They outsourced to Major League Baseball Advanced Media, right? And Major League Baseball Advanced Media, this is the final paragraph of the chapter, was able to develop HBO Go, the streaming platform, which is doing fairly well now, as we know, for HBO because there are no competing interests. But the question that Smith and Talon kind of posed, and keeping in mind that, you know, this is still all happening. This is not, and there's in no way, like, is this any of this over? So we don't know where it's going to go. You guys love asking the question, what are things going to look like? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But part of that is, like, more importantly, like, we have to be kind of vigilant as to what things are happening now in order to think about what will happen in the future. But they pose the question, what will happen if MLB and HBO do decide to compete, right? And more importantly, they're kind of suggesting that this is what's happening, right? Or increasingly, this is the direction that things are going. And so to kind of cap off the week, again, you know, history is negotiation. History is also ongoing, right? Just because things are stable now in the media landscape, don't for a second assume that this is what it's going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years. No one thought that this was going, like this current state of things, that this was how it was going to be in March of 2020. We just don't know these things, right? So it's kind of dangerous to assume that we do. You know, don't ever assume that we have a full comprehension of why the things are, or why the way of things are the way they are. Okay, so first week, we got through it. Well, I mean, I got through the tapes, the lectures. Make sure to, so that we carry over into Moodle, so that we extend the conversation there, so that it's not just me talking at you through the camera, but that there is a back and forth, you know, because again, I chose this format instead of Zoom and synchronous learning for multiple reasons, and mostly for your ease, and thinking of you guys first and foremost. But, you know, again, you guys kind of have to meet me halfway. Don't forget to watch Jalen and Jonah's, or access Jalen and Jonah's presentations, and I will see you guys over there. Have a great weekend. Please be safe. Let me know if you need anything. I'm out.